Greetings. Welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Sunday, March 11th, 2025. And on Sundays, we consider the purpose and meaning of life. To have purpose and meaning in life can be achieved through a variety of different belief systems, but accompanied by the daily behaviors and practices that align with those core beliefs and values. As I've mentioned before, there can be tremendous diversity in terms of how each person determines one's particular purpose and personal mission statement. For nearly everyone, though, the pursuit of one's purpose and the aim to live a life of full meaning requires or involves some kind of a social component. That is, there's always almost some degree of interaction and a social context within which we live out our fullest and most meaningful lives. In only the rarest of circumstances will some small number of people equate their special purpose and meaning as attainable only by going solo, for example, into the wilderness, or otherwise breaking off their previous relationships. Instead, we know that humans have long been characterized as the quintessential social being. And yet, increasingly, the evidence continues to mount that we've been retreating from our social lives, or closeting our social selves, if you will. For example, how often do we tend to eat alone, as opposed to with others or in a group setting? And indeed, since nearly 3 in 10 adults currently live alone, both in Canada and the United States, almost by default, that will be their main eating strategy. And yet, even within our family settings, do we typically eat with our partners or the classic family dinner? Well, less so than in the past. We have good research that confirms that. In addition, we have evidence to suggest that even dating back to the mid-1960s, our external socializing, that is outside of our homes, has gradually declined. But since 2001, that decline has grown even sharper, even steeper. In fact, recent evidence suggests that from 2003 to 2023, there's been a full 20% decline, according to the American Time Use Survey, in our in-person socializing outside of our homes. And there are a variety of other indicators, too. We head out to the movies far less often than we used to. Most of our screen time has been replaced with in-home movies and entertainment. Men spend on average 7 hours in front of the television for every hour that they spend with another person outside of their home. Female pet owners spend more time actively engaged with their pets than in face-to-face contact with members of their own species. Again, these are statistical averages. They obviously don't apply to everyone. Plenty of exceptions. But in general, what are the dominant patterns? They suggest that we're increasingly retreating from our social and public lives. Does that mean we are experiencing, as the Surgeon General put out in 2023, an epidemic of loneliness? Well, let's understand that solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. And being alone does not necessarily mean that you are lonely. Even though people are spending more time alone, including young people, the proportion of people reporting being lonely has actually declined somewhat in recent years. So that means then, to some degree, that people are obviously finding some comfort, some solace, they're making connections through their phones, through their digital machines of all kinds, through different types of social media and interactive platforms, and so forth. And increasingly with AI. I mean, now you can develop chats or have best friends in real time who are speaking from a computer-generated platform. And those trends, by the way, are only going to continue. Now, what we can probably all attest to, though, is the fact that to some degree, The cell phone revolution has fundamentally transformed our lives, our daily patterns and rhythms. Young people spend far more time on their phones these days and digital devices in general, as opposed to hanging out in person with friends, or playing outside in general, or getting a license even. That's something that's no longer necessary, or even going on in-person dates. According to the Digital Parenting Initiative, screens occupy as much as 1/3 of a young person's or a teen's waking hours. It's incredible. And so while there's an obvious social aspect to being online, and there are certainly some instrumental benefits, the reality too is that people are retreating from face-to-face engagements. And that, by the way, applies not just to young people, but it applies across all age groups. We're all caught up in the tsunami of the digital revolution. The effects are just most profound amongst our youngest generation. So although the human brain's reached 90% of its maturity or full development by age 5, the neural circuitry requires a much lengthier time to fully mature. Evolution may have helped the species to engage in an extended period of learning, social learning. According to Derek Thompson of The Atlantic, he writes, "The best kind of play is physical, outdoors with other kids, and unsupervised, allowing children to press the limits of their abilities while figuring out how to manage conflict and tolerate pain." But now young people's attention is funneled into devices that take them out of their body, denying them the physical world education they need, end quote. So a key byproduct of this shift, though not the only cause, is the following. We know from the evidence too and population-based evidence, that teen anxiety and depression are basically at all-time highs. A 2023 survey, for example, determined that more than half of teen girls said that they felt persistently sad or hopeless. I can tell you from my years of experience at the university that we've seen a dramatic uptick as well in the last decade, especially, of students who are reporting deep sadness, anxiety, and depression. We've had to expand our social supports, our counseling services, our mental health clinic, our walk-in clinics, and so forth dramatically. So something's happening. Something's amiss. People are not, in that sense, quite as happy, perhaps, as they used to be. Or they're struggling. We're seeing more young people struggling than ever in my lifetime, at least in my 38 years of university teaching. So these are concerning developments, to say the least. Phones, of course, mean that solitude in general is much more crowded than it used to be. And the crowds are more solitary in nature. Our open windows to the world mean that we have the opportunity and even the desire, perhaps, to spend more time alone and in that environment than we could with respect to shutting things down and the proverbial recharging of our batteries. It becomes much more difficult to do that. I often say we've all become Pavlov's dog, responding to every ping or ding or whatever mechanism of notification that we have on our phones. And we start salivating. Who's texting me? Who's contacting me? Who's liked my latest post? Those sorts of things. And so what that means is that we have a much more difficult time disengaging and having that real downtime. Okay? It becomes increasingly scarce or rare for us to spend our time actually, offline and without being connected. Even worse, what that can mean, and often does mean, is that we're constantly being subjected to a kind of continual stream of information and notifications and posts, certainly by friends, sometimes by colleagues, perhaps by frenemies, often by strangers, and certainly through the celebrity culture. Okay, so yeah, we need to consider these issues, these potential effects. And of course, in the adult world these days, what else has happened? Not just even before the pandemic, but the pandemic accelerated some of these trends. So, for example, people are more likely these days to obviously be working from home, but in general to take meetings from home, to shop online, to eat at home, to be entertained at home, and even to practice their spiritual pursuits or to worship at home. From 2003 to 2023, adults were spending an additional, on average, 99 more minutes per day at home. Now, that's an extra hour and a half plus each day on average in the privacy of their own homes. So it's not just that we're more likely to engage in remote work, although that's obviously true, but we might generalize to suggest that we're engaging increasingly in a remote life. Our homes have then just reinforced some degree of social isolation to the point where you could make a case that we are almost building or designing our homes and our lives for aloneness. On the male side, the single men in particular, and those without children, are spending more time than ever alone. The so-called secular monks, as Taggart talks about in an article that he wrote a few years back, these are the secular monks who forego fatherhood with gusto to focus on their commitments to working on their bodies, their bank accounts, and their meditation-sharpened minds. Usually they have, there's a whole manosphere, but even if you're not part of the manosphere, there's all kinds of influencers and people who, to whom they are aligned or they have commitments. And again, this sort of shapes who they are, who young people are, and who they're becoming. And of course, depending on your perspective, not all of that's healthy. Not all of the influencers are healthy. But I'm not going to get further into that particular rabbit hole. Instead, I want to talk about the impacts more generally. So Richard Reeves talks about the need among humans for neededness, the ways in which we make ourselves essential to our families and our communities. But he goes on to talk about how building these bridges to community takes energy. And in that sense, many people don't have that energy or that commitment to constructing relationships to the same ways that they used to. And in place of neededness, especially amongst these young men, despair is creeping in. And especially amongst men who are unemployed or underemployed. These folks are especially vulnerable. And worst of all, the loneliness and despair can literally be fatal. So since 2001, there have been perhaps 400,000, some estimates place the figure higher, but at least 400,000 drug overdose deaths just in the United States from opioids and synthetics such as fentanyl, which are, by the way, not party drugs, but typically taken alone. Mark Dunkelman from Brown University argues that some bonds are getting stronger, such as parents spending more time than ever, on average, with their children, and many families maintaining constant communication, especially with mobile devices and online chat groups and that sort of thing. At the same time, online apps and subreddit streams keep us connected to a global crowd that shares our interests. And that can be a good thing, right? We have people that we don't even know necessarily whom we can connect with online and talk about common interests, whatever they may be. So what's missing in all of this? The social engagements and contacts that foster community or strengthen the villages in which we actually live. And I'm thinking of the classic U-shaped dynamic whereby we have higher levels of connectedness to our intimates, our bloodlines, right? Intimate relationships, but also to a broader and even global tribes, linked by shared affinities. But yet in between these two extremes, or these two types of sets of relationships, we see a severe decline or a deficit at the center of social life. Again, at the center between these two extreme types of relationships. And so what's happening is that we are less and less likely to be engaged with and live among the familiar but not intimate people in our lives. Your neighbor, the people in your community, that general sense of belonging to, or with respect to community gatherings that span and transcend, in many instances, the family backgrounds or the political differences that might otherwise bubble up and keep us, at odds with one another. So, in short, what we're seeing is a decline in the societal or the social cohesion mechanisms that have kept us together. I'm going to refer to this broadly as the decline of village life. In other words, this involves less everyday conversation and contact with one's neighbors, of peoples of various kinds in community settings. Historically, we've always fostered such bonds to varying degrees, even in our villages that haven't always been fully integrated, shall we say. But seeing and interacting with people regularly, especially in the public sphere, has all kinds of positive effects. So, for example, experimental research has shown that subjects who were asked to reach out and carry on a conversation with a complete stranger on their commute to work reported feeling much more satisfied, much more positive, as compared with the comparison group of subjects who were asked or instructed to just remain in silence or keep to themselves on their commutes to work. That type of research, by the way, has been replicated in a variety of different contexts. And there are a great many other benefits. So, for example, meeting with others in person at the PTA or, for the neighborhood watch meeting, put people of very different backgrounds and people who differ along the political spectrum in contact with one another. It's always much more difficult to demonize people if you're seeing them in face-to-face settings, and especially when you're there for some kind of a shared purpose. I know that the people that I'd play hoops with would come from all backgrounds, from all persuasions, but we always focused on our shared mission of playing the best basketball that we could. And the real objective was to have a great time. So a key issue then is that the social interactions in the public sphere usually help to moderate extremism of all kinds, but especially or including political extremism. Again, allowing people to connect over their shared interests and concerns within their own neighborhoods and their communities. Again, even though they might be at different ends of the political spectrum. The village then ends up being the best arena within which we can practice having disagreements and forcibly, or in many instances, learning how to compromise with the others that we're sitting there in the same room with, or, sitting next to each other at the ball field or whatever the case might be. So look at the importance, even just recently, of the town hall meetings in responses to people who've been upset or concerned about what's happening in their communities, or specifically in response to what's happening politically in the United States. People are banding together to talk about their concerns. They're trying to foster that sense of concern and community. Okay, so I'm not going to go further down that rabbit hole either. But the point is that the overall result then is, if you don't do this, if you don't have these in-person or face-to-face meetings, is a greater likelihood to continue to demonize one's opponent because of the very tribal nature of politics. So it's not surprising then that the erosion of the village happens to have coincided with what we're seeing politically. Every election seems to feel increasingly like an existential threat or a quest to vanquish one's opponent. So, for example, again, we have some really interesting research in this regard. In 2000, only 8% of the partisans of either political party in the United States gave the other party a 0 on the feeling thermometer. That's as cold as you can get towards one another. 8%. By 2020, that was 40%. That's a tsunami. And by the way, there's other research that indicates, for example, college students, university students, increasingly won't even date someone if they belong to the other side, to the other political party. That's not something I ever thought about when I was dating in college or university. Partly because I didn't really date much, but that's beside the point. Okay, anyway, I have much more to say about these types of dynamics, but I actually want to use this final couple of minutes to announce something important, I think, in the context of the Dr. J vlog series. I'm contributing. I'm part of the problem. George Costanza, I'm the problem. No, what I mean is I'm contributing to the problem by promoting another YouTube channel and the privatization of your experience. I thought that maybe I could help share my sense of optimism, my knowledge, perhaps in the role of some kind of a wise elder. Maybe that's overstating the case. And certainly I was hoping, or been hoping, to avoid the trope of mansplaining. You can be the judge. But the point is that what was perhaps the best thing that I've done in my life, or the thing that I've been best at, has been my role as a university professor. Again, we all have things at which we excel, right? Something that we do the best of all the things that we know how to do. And so I think my university teaching has always been my special gift, if you will, if I can say that without sounding conceited. I don't mean it that way. But you know why I think I've done well in that specific regard, at least in part? Well, because that's something that I do in person with a well-prepared lesson plan, detailed notes, and most importantly, I teach, I hope, I think my students will attest, with a certain degree of not just preparedness and knowledge to share, but also with empathy and, to some extent, humor that allow me to reach people much more directly, viscerally, emotionally, and not just cognitively. I could just put up a transcript with all my thoughts conveyed in words, upload a file, and the students could get exactly the same information. They don't have to sit in a lecture, sit in a classroom, but that would be vastly different from getting the same in-person experience. Plus, in person, I'm far more likely to be able, and I do, try to read the room, get direct feedback from the students, from the audience. And plus, I can also then change things up based on that feedback. If I see a befuddled face, somebody doesn't understand something, or, and this happens too, if people are bored by what I'm saying, right? Or on the other side of that, if I can lean into some ideas if people are responding positively. And that's, by the way, typically when I'll also go off script. And sometimes you just get into a flow, if you know what I mean, when you're teaching, when you're engaged in an endeavor that you're fully committed to, and you reach that next stage, that state where you can do things you just couldn't even imagine before. Well, none of that, of course, is going to happen if I just post the notes online. So bottom line is I can then respond, not only change things up if I think things are not going well or if the students are not responding, but more importantly, or just as importantly, I can then amplify the experience or enhance it through additional examples, through additional expressions, both physical, not just verbal, but also nonverbal. And all of that stuff makes a difference. And it helps the students connect. It resonates more deeply. I can't do that, simply by posting notes or lectures online. So that's the big difference. And finally, what else am I doing if I show up in class every day? I'm showing, obviously, that I care, just like the parent who reads to their kids every night. Okay? And most importantly, then, what does that mean? I'm building relationships with the students. It's not an accident that I've actually written more than 50 letters of reference or letters of recommendation for graduate programs, for jobs, for awards, just in the last 2 years alone. I know this because I had to share my list of people. I didn't have to. I volunteered to share it with our foundation because they wanted to know about students who'd recently graduated. And I said, well, I have a whole whack of them that I'd written letters for. So I shared with them the names and contact information. So the more important point here, of course, is that I got to know them, they got to know me. And again, especially because I would show up regularly, and amongst those students who'd show up regularly as well. So in short, I've learned, I think, in my little YouTube, my vlogging experience, that I cannot replicate what I do in the classroom online, or at least not in this particular format. You can always get the information that I have, and probably most of whatever knowledge I might have to share, from plenty of other sources. I'm not special, obviously, in that regard. Instead, I have much more to offer when I teach, or when I've been a youth sports coach for that matter, which I did for about 35 years. I do all of that stuff much better in person. And so that's led to my decision to cut back then on the vlogging. For a small number of you, that might be a bit of a disappointment. But let's be honest, my vlogs are not catching fire or growing in popularity. In fact, quite the opposite since I started. And that's fine. I still show up to class even if only 3 other students are there. The issues then are twofold. One, I don't want to be part of the problem of keeping people addicted to online platforms, or at least not beyond what they already do. Okay? I mean, I'm not a Luddite. There are plenty of people and channels that can help provide interesting or timely information or music or entertainment. Whatever else we might be seeking online. I'm cool with that. I use this stuff too, to a limited degree. And secondly, I think I'm doing a lot of work to prepare these for relatively little impact. And again, I don't mean to slight what I'm doing or, to imply anything negative per se, other than to suggest that, we all have to make decisions about where to invest our time and energy. And, since I do have a small number of subscribers and a few people who clearly enjoy what I'm doing, I'm certainly going to continue to do some vlogging, but I'm announcing here that I'm going to change things up. And I'm going to do perhaps 1 or 2 vlogs each week based on the topics that seem to be most interesting to people, and in combination, hopefully, with where I sense that I might have something really cool or important to say. And that's certainly not always the case. I mean, we all go through our ups and downs. We're more inspired at some times, we're less inspired at others. These are the normal biorhythms and daily rhythms of our lived experiences. But the point is I'd like to focus on just those kinds of vlogs where I think I might have something more important to say. Usually, hopefully it's the kind of things, as I say, in terms of what I do, that will truly inspire or perhaps ideally foster some kind of enlightenment. I hope I've done that today. So, in short, the best of the best knowledge and wisdom and inspirational stories that I have to offer. So, excuse me. So, for sure, what I do with my stuff, with my energy and efforts, are meant to be helpful to anyone or everyone, not just members of a cult or a narrowly defined tribe. There are plenty of those online, and politically on the right and on the left and so forth. Instead, what I'd like to do is offer something, or continue to try to offer something that almost anyone might find interesting. Okay? Hopefully, again, across a broad spectrum of peoples, that they might find useful and ideally inspiring. And maybe at times, and this is a big ask, maybe even life-changing. You never know. But for sure, in the meantime, if you want to continue to be part of this little community, this little village, shall we say, then stay subscribed. Okay? If you want to support what I'm doing, as they say, then as ever, and especially if you like the content, then please remember to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells. Stay in touch. And if you don't, that's okay too. I still love you. All right, in the meantime, as ever, please continue to create peace in your lives and nurture love in your hearts, and give someone, especially someone you think might be lonely, give them a hug today. Bye for now.